The rain hammered against the windshield, each drop a tiny, insistent fist against the glass. The wipers fought a losing battle, a rhythmic squeak and smear that did nothing to clear the oily sheen of water. Outside, the world was a smear of black and bruised purple, the trees along the roadside skeletal fingers reaching for the bruised sky. This was it. This was the night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal that had been a constant, gnawing hum in the back of my mind for the last hour. My phone, a dead weight in my palm, offered no solace, its screen stubbornly blank. The GPS icon, once a beacon of digital certainty, had vanished hours ago, leaving me adrift in a sea of whispering pines and fading asphalt. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. My hands, usually steady when poring over brittle manuscripts or carefully brushing dust from ancient artifacts, felt alien, clumsy. This inheritance. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a quiet reprieve from the endless cycle of grant applications and dismissive peer reviews. A chance to finally immerse myself in the forgotten, the arcane, the stories that clung to the edges of history like cobwebs. Instead, it felt like a trap. The letter had arrived 2 weeks ago, a thick cream-colored envelope bearing a seal I didn't recognize. My mother's distant cousin, apparently. Someone I'd never met, never even heard of. A recluse, the solicitor had explained in a voice as dry as old parchment. Lived alone in a sprawling estate out in the middle of nowhere. And now it was mine, all of it. The solicitors had been vague about the details, but the sheer size of the property, the isolated location, it all spoke of a fortune I couldn't have imagined. Enough to fund my research for years. Enough to escape the suffocating mediocrity of my current academic life. I'd always been drawn to the shadows, the whispers of what lies beneath the veneer of accepted history. While my colleagues chased tenure by dissecting the obvious, I was drawn to the margins, the folklore, the tales dismissed as superstition. The more obscure, the more I felt I was on the cusp of something real. Something that pulsed with an energy the dry, dusty halls of academia could never capture. This manor, they'd said, was steeped in local legend, built on something old, very old. The solicitor had cleared his throat, a nervous sound. There are stories, he'd admitted, his gaze skittering away from mine. Local folklore, nothing to concern myself with, of course. But it did concern me. It was the hook, the irresistible pull, the prospect of a place where the past wasn't just documented, but lived, breathed, and perhaps still lurked. I'd packed a few essentials, my most trusted research materials, and set off, fueled by a potent cocktail of desperation and academic fervor. Now, the rain seemed to be washing away all my carefully constructed resolve, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of apprehension. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig sent a jolt through me. My breathing grew shallow, ragged. I told myself it was just the weather, the unfamiliarity of the terrain. Watched. My mind, usually a sharp instrument for sifting through historical minutiae, felt dulled, sluggish. The isolation was beginning to work its insidious magic, amplifying every minor discomfort into a significant threat. I could almost taste the damp earth, the decaying leaves, a primal scent that seemed to seep through the closed windows. Then a flicker, off to the side of the road, a faint, unnatural glow. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, a trick of the light, I told myself. Was it a house, a distant lamp, or something else entirely? My grip tightened on the wheel again. I pushed on the manor and whatever secrets it held, a looming, uncertain destination. What was waiting for me in that desolate place? Arrival and initial exploration, the headlights cut weak, trembling arcs through the oppressive black. Rain slicked the asphalt, turning the unfamiliar road into a mirror that reflected only the sickly glow of my dashboard. Each curve brought a fresh wave of anxiety. The GPS had died an hour ago, a blank screen mocking my reliance on technology. Now only the faded markings on the map, crumpled in my lap, offered any guidance. The wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to wrap around the car, pressing in. Trees, skeletal and gaunt, clawed at the edges of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching. I was deep in the country now, the kind of place where the silence between sounds was louder than any noise. The air grew heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. My knuckles were white where I gripped the steering wheel. This whole inheritance felt like a trap, a gilded cage disguised as opportunity. The solicitor's words echoed in my mind. Remote, extensive repairs, a property with character. That was a polite euphemism for decay, for neglect, for secrets buried deep. The map indicated I was close. A turn marked only by a weathered stone post, half consumed by moss, led off the main road. The track was little more than 2 ruts carved into the mud, bordered by a dense wall of overgrown hedgerows that scraped against the car's chassis with a sound like fingernails on slate. The branches snagged, pulling at my progress as if the land itself resisted my intrusion. Then it appeared, looming out of the mist and the deepening twilight, not a house but a silhouette, a jagged outline against the bruised sky. It was larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling, Gothic monstrosity that seemed to absorb the scant light rather than reflect it. The manor. A choked gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't just old, it felt ancient, burdened by centuries of something. A palpable weight settled on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. This was no charming fixer-upper. This was a tomb. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain on the roof and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I fumbled for the keys, my fingers stiff and clumsy. The front door, a massive slab of oak, looked as if it had weathered a siege. Dust motes danced in the faint beams of my flashlight, swirling like spectral dancers. The air was stagnant, carrying the musty odor of decay, of forgotten lives. Cobwebs, thick as cotton batting, draped from the high ceilings and clung to the ornate but cracked plasterwork. My flashlight beam traced the walls, revealing faded tapestries depicting scenes I couldn't quite make out, their colors leached away by time and damp. It felt as if I had stepped into a place that had been holding its breath, waiting. My boots echoed on the stone floor, each step a violation. I moved deeper into the manor, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress. The rooms were cavernous, filled with the spectral shapes of shrouded furniture. I pulled back a sheet in what must have been a drawing room. A grand piano, its ivory keys yellowed and chipped, stood silent, a monument to lost melodies. The wood was warped, the strings rusted. The scent of damp wood and something vaguely floral, like dried, pressed flowers, wafted from it. Further on, I found a library. Shelves lined the walls, laden with ancient tomes, their spines brittle and faded. I ran a gloved finger along one, the leather crumbling beneath my touch. The titles were in languages I barely recognized, or in scripts that seemed alien. A peculiar symbol, a spiral within a circle, was embossed on many of the covers. I'd seen it before in my research. A forgotten sigil tied to obscure fertility rites and appeasement. The thought sent a shiver through me. In the center of the room, a large oak table was set with a single tarnished silver goblet. My breath hitched. It was too deliberate, too present. This wasn't just neglect, it was a tableau frozen in time. I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible draft, even though all the windows were sealed shut. It seemed to emanate from a section of the wall behind one of the bookshelves. My heart began to pound, a dull, insistent thrum against my ribs. I pushed against the bookshelf, expecting resistance. Instead, it swung inward with a low, grating groan, revealing a narrow, unlit passage. Was this the heart of the manor, or something far older? Unearthing the past, the night drive on unfamiliar road. GPS lost signal had stretched into an eternity. The rain, which had started as a drizzle, now hammered against the windshield with a ferocity that made me wince. My wipers, already struggling, fought a losing battle against the deluge. The old Volvo, a relic I'd inherited along with the manor, coughed and sputtered like a dying beast, each cough a fresh stab of dread in my gut. The road ahead was a black ribbon, slick and treacherous, swallowed by the encroaching, dripping trees. Branches, skeletal and gnarled, clawed at the edges of my vision, seeming to reach for the car. I gripped the steering wheel, my grip tight. The air in the car was thick with the scent of damp wool and stale coffee, a claustrophobic cocktail that did little to calm my nerves. Finally, the trees thinned, giving way to a crumbling stone wall. Beyond it, a shape loomed. The manor. It was less a house and more a monument to decay. Dark, hulking. It seemed to absorb the meager light from my headlights. A single broken shutter hung precariously from an upper window, banging a mournful rhythm against the stone with each gust of wind. I parked the car, the tires crunching on gravel that sounded unnervingly like bone fragments. Inside, the air was a stagnant exhalation of dust and something else, something earthy and ancient. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating cobwebs thick as shrouds draped over decaying furniture. The grand hall was a testament to a forgotten opulence, now ravaged by time and neglect. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step a hesitant exploration into the manor's secrets. My initial goal, after the initial shock of the manor's sheer decrepitude, had been to find any documentation, any records that might shed light on my distant relative, Elias Thorne. He'd been a recluse, a man of whom little was known. It was the feeling of being an intruder, not just in a house, but in a place that held its breath, waiting. I spent the first day in a feverish exploration, driven by a historian's insatiable curiosity and a growing sense of foreboding. The library, surprisingly, was the least dilapidated room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound tomes, their titles faded and cryptic. They felt strangely warm to the touch, almost alive. One in particular, thicker than the others, drew my attention. It had no title, no markings, just a single tarnished silver clasp. With trembling fingers, I unfastened the clasp. The pages were brittle, the ink a faded sepia. It was a journal, Elias Thorne's journal. His handwriting, neat at first, became increasingly frantic, jagged as the entries progressed. He wrote of the land, of its deep roots, of a presence that stirred beneath the surface. He described the manor as a ward, a prison built to contain something that craved the earth's blood. My breath hitched, recurring, marked by the turning of the earth. He called it the harvest of sighs. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing. One passage, scrawled in a desperate hand, sent a shiver down my spine. It demands, it always demands. The old ones knew, they understood the price. He mentioned a stone beneath the oldest oak, a place where the veil was thin. The rain outside had intensified, wind howling like a tormented spirit. The house groaned around me, the ancient timbers protesting the storm's fury. Elias Thorne hadn't just been a recluse, he'd been a man consumed by something. Was it a warning or a testament? I closed the journal, the sound echoing in the vast room. What was this presence he spoke of? And what did it want? The engine of my beat-up sedan whined, a pathetic protest against the relentless incline. Rain lashed against the windshield, each drop a tiny hammer blow distorting the already blurry beam of my headlights. The GPS had died miles ago, its cheerful voice replaced by a dead, black screen. Now only the winding, unlit road stretched before me, a black ribbon unspooling into the Inkai void. This was a mistake. I knew it. This whole inheritance, this crumbling manor miles from anywhere, was a mistake. The trees pressed in, skeletal fingers scraping at the sky. Their branches, slick with rain, looked like gnarled arms reaching, grasping. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen life. A sharp snap echoed from the woods to my left. I flinched, my foot instinctively easing off the gas. Just a branch, I told myself, just the wind. But the air felt heavy, charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was thick, cloying, seeping into the car, into my lungs. I squinted, trying to make out the road ahead. The headlights cut a meager swat through the gloom, illuminating only the immediate, treacherous curves. My own breathing felt too loud, a frantic counterpoint to the stillness. I'd been so eager to escape the city, to lose myself in the history of the manor. Now I was just lost, utterly terrifyingly lost. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the slick asphalt. The car lurched, throwing me against the seatbelt. My heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. What was that? An animal, a deer, but it had been too. Deliberate, too tall. I stared, my eyes straining against the rain. Nothing, just the impenetrable wall of trees. I'd been reading those old journals, those fragmented accounts of the manor, of the land. I dismissed them as local superstition, as the ramblings of isolated minds. Now a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I started to drive again, slower this time, my senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the car's suspension sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, at the stack of brittle, yellowed pages I'd brought from the manor. The last entry, the one about the demand, felt more potent now, more menacing. Suddenly the headlights flickered, once, twice. My stomach clenched, not the battery, not the alternator. This felt different, targeted, as if something was interfering. I tapped the dashboard, a futile gesture. The lights steadied, but the unease remained, a knot tightening in my gut. And then the sound. It was faint at first, a low hum like distant machinery, but it wasn't mechanical. It was organic, a guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath the car. It grew louder, a resonant thrumming that vibrated through the steering wheel, through my teeth. It felt ancient, primal. It felt like a heartbeat. I pulled over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the narrow shoulder. The humming intensified, surrounding me, pressing in. It was no longer a sound I heard, but a feeling I experienced, a pressure in my chest, in my ears. The rain seemed to momentarily cease, the world holding its breath with me. Through the distorted glass, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the reach of my headlights, was a figure. It was impossibly tall, silhouetted against the deeper blackness of the woods. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze, a palpable weight that pinned me to my seat. My breath hitched. This was no trick of the light, no figment of my stressed imagination. This was real. It wasn't a voice, not in the human sense, but a presence, a thought projected directly into my mind. The figure remained, an unmoving sentinel of the night. The humming reached a crescendo, then abruptly cut off, plunging the world back into the drumming of the rain and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The figure was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I fumbled for the ignition, my hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life, a welcome, familiar sound. I didn't dare look back as I pulled onto the road, accelerating, the tires spitting gravel. The manor and whatever resided there knew I was coming, and it was waiting. What did it want? Vanished. The air in the library felt thick, heavy, like breathing through damp wool. I stood frozen, the phantom hum still vibrating in my bones, the image of that dark silhouette seared behind my eyelids. It hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound beyond that unearthly thrum, and then, nothing. Just the familiar, relentless drumming of rain against the ancient panes. My hands trembled as I reached for the heavy leather-bound tome, its pages brittle with age. The script within was a tangle of archaic symbols and faded ink, a language I was only just beginning to decipher. But the symbols I'd seen on the floor, the ones that had pulsed with that sickening light, they were here, scattered throughout this forgotten history. I spent the next few hours hunched over the book, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my efforts. The rain outside had intensified, a furious torrent that rattled the very foundations of the manor. Each gust of wind sounded like a mournful cry, or perhaps something far less human. My eyes burned, my back ached, but I pushed on. The fragmented entries spoke of a binding, a debt owed to the earth, and a cycle of sustenance. It was vague, maddeningly so, but the recurring motif was clear. The land demanded a life to nourish the roots, to keep the balance. And the ritual, the one etched onto the library floor, was the mechanism. A sudden, sharp crack from upstairs sent a jolt through me. My head snapped up, my breath catching in my throat. Only the storm. I told myself it was the old house settling, the wind finding new ways to howl through broken eaves, but the unease that had been a low thrum beneath my skin was now a sharp, insistent needle. The local archives, that was my only hope. The drive was a nightmare. The storm had turned the winding country roads into treacherous streams. The old car's headlights cut weak swaths through the sheeting rain, illuminating only the immediate, slick asphalt. My phone's GPS had died hours ago, a dead weight in my pocket. Every bend in the road felt unfamiliar, the trees pressing in on either side like skeletal fingers. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, my gaze darting between the road and the impenetrable blackness beyond. I took a wrong turn. I knew at the moment the road narrowed, the trees closing in so tightly that their branches scraped against the car. The asphalt gave way to a rutted, muddy track. I slammed on the brakes, the tires spinning uselessly in the muck. The engine sputtered, died, dead, just like the GPS, just like my chances of reaching the archives before dawn. My mind raced, conjuring images from the grimoire, the symbols on the floor, the spectral figure. There was this part of it. There was the entity actively preventing me from finding a solution. I was not just a historian uncovering a past. I was a player in a game I didn't understand, a game with stakes I was only beginning to comprehend. A faint light flickered in the distance, through the dense curtain of rain, a single solitary glow. It wasn't the steady beam of a house, but something more, erratic, pulsing like a dying ember. Against my better judgment, against the screaming voice of self-preservation in my head, I opened the car door. The wind and rain lashed at me, a brutal embrace. The mud sucked at my boots. I started walking towards the light, each step a deliberate act of defiance or perhaps of surrender. Something organic. The light grew brighter, coalescing, and with it, a low, resonant hum began to fill the air, a sound that resonated not in my ears but deep within my very being. It was the same hum from the library. What was waiting for me at the source of that light? The grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, each resonant gong a hammer blow against my already frayed nerves. The air in the manor was a stagnant pool, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic like old blood. I'd spent the last week poring over the brittle pages of the journals, tracing the faded ink, piecing together the whispers of the entity. It demanded a tribute, a life given freely to ensure the land's continued, if grim, repose. And the date, etched in the margin of the most recent entry, was today. I clutched the heavy, leather-bound book, my grip tight. The entity wasn't a ghost, not in the traditional sense. The text described it as a presence, a hunger rooted in the very soil, awakened by generations of violence. It fed on fear, on despair, and on life willingly offered. The previous occupant, my distant cousin, had been the last to fulfill the pact. His final journal entry, a frantic scrawl, spoke of a cold that seeped into his marrow, a voice that promised peace in exchange for oblivion. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My breath hitched. It wasn't the wind, But the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the insistent thrumming that had begun again, low and guttural, told a different story. I needed to get out, to escape this cursed place. I'd packed a small bag enough for a few days, and my car was waiting by the overgrown drive. But a gnawing uncertainty held me captive. If I fled, would it follow? The journals hinted at a tether, a bond forged by the ritual that could not be easily broken. I could feel its attention, a palpable weight pressing down. It was testing me, waiting for me to break. I think I can escape what is owed. The voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across stone. It wasn't coming from any single direction, but seemed to emanate from the very walls. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I forced myself to stand, the journal still clutched in my hand. A dry, rasping sound, akin to laughter, filled the room. The land remembers. The pact is etched in blood in the bones beneath my feet. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. The books on the shelves seemed to lean in, their titles blurring into meaningless script. I am the inheritor, the voice continued, growing stronger, more insistent. The bloodline carries the debt. I stumbled towards the library door, my hand reaching for the brass knob. But it was no longer there. Only acceptance. I spun around, my gaze falling on the ornate fireplace. The embers in the hearth had long since died, yet a faint, phosphorescent glow now emanated from within, casting eerie, shifting patterns on the ceiling. And from that glow, a figure began to emerge. It was tall, impossibly thin, its form indistinct, like smoke given shape. It had no discernible features, only a gaping maw of pure blackness where a face should be. This was it, the confrontation. The entity was revealing itself, its true form, or at least a manifestation of its power. I could feel the raw, ancient energy radiating from it, a force that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. My mind raced. The journals spoke of loopholes, of ways to appease the entity without complete annihilation. A sacrifice, yes, but not necessarily a life. A sacrifice of will, of desire, of the very essence of what made me me. What do I want? I choked out, my voice trembling. The figure glided closer, the air around it crackling with unseen energy. My essence, my future, my life. I thought of the research, the countless hours spent unraveling the secrets of this place. I had come seeking knowledge, and I had found this, a monstrous hunger bound to the land. I will not be my sacrifice, I declared, my voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. I remembered a passage in the oldest journal, a cryptic reference to a gift freely given yet never lost. The entity paused, its smoky form rippling. Foolish mortal, there is no gift that can appease the hunger but oblivion. I closed my eyes, focusing on the image of the manor, of the land, of the generations who had lived and died here. I wasn't just Marcus, the historian. I was the inheritor, the link in the chain. I offer my memories, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity. My ambition, my desire to understand, take them. Let them sate my hunger for knowledge, for the past, but leave me my life. A guttural growl rumbled through the room. The phosphorescent glow from the fireplace intensified, bathing the room in an unholy light. The figure seemed to stretch, to contort, as if in pain or rage. I cannot bargain with the roots of this place. It shrieked, the sound tearing at my eardrums. But I held firm, picturing the memories, the drive, the very essence of my being flowing out of me, not as a surrender, but as an offering. I felt a strange sensation, a lightness spreading through my mind, as if vast archives were being meticulously cataloged and removed. The specific details of my research, the faces of the figures in the folklore, the thrill of discovery, they began to fade, replaced by a vast, echoing emptiness. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. It seemed confused. The hunger was still there, but it was a different kind of hunger now, a gnawing curiosity. This is not enough, it hissed, a hint of uncertainty in its voice. My obsession, my driving force, was being stripped away. The figure seemed to shrink, to recede back into the fireplace. But as the entity retreated, a new sound began, faint at first, then growing louder. A rhythmic, mechanical whirring. It was coming from outside. From the drive, my car. What was happening? Had my offering been accepted? Or was this something else entirely, a new threat emerging from the night? The air in the study crackled, thick with the residue of that inhuman voice. My ears rang, a dull throb behind my temples. The phosphorescence from the hearth had receded, leaving behind only the dying embers, and a chill that had nothing to do with the late autumn air, whatever it had been, was gone, vanished as if it had been nothing more than a trick of the firelight and my own frayed nerves. But the growl, the raw, animalistic sound, had been too real. The words too specific. Roots of this place. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. My hands, I realized, were clenched into fists, gripped tight. My body hummed with a residual tension, a coiled spring that refused to relax. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed, a mournful, drawn-out sound that seemed to echo the emptiness that had descended. It was past midnight. I needed to leave. The thought came with a sudden, desperate urgency. The manner, the folklore, the thing. It was too much. My research, my inheritance, it had all led me here to this terrifying confrontation, and I had no idea if I had won, lost, or simply postponed the inevitable. My keys felt cold and alien in my palm as I fumbled for the heavy oak door. The latch groaned in protest, a familiar sound now, but one that sent a fresh tremor through me. The night air, when it finally hit me, was sharp and biting, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I threw it into reverse, the tires crunching on the gravel drive. I kept my eyes fixed on the winding path, the skeletal trees lining the drive like grasping fingers. Then the road. It was narrower than I remembered, the asphalt cracked and uneven. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a suffocating canopy overhead. I was on the night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal. The familiar red line on my phone screen had flickered and died hours ago, leaving me reliant on fading memories of a map I'd barely glanced at. Each curve was a gamble. Was this the turn I'd taken earlier, or was I heading deeper into this forgotten stretch of countryside? The road twisted and turned, a serpent of blacktop leading nowhere I recognized. I swiped at the glass, my hand trembling. Nothing, just the relentless, unnerving squeak. A sudden jolt threw me against the steering wheel, a pothole deeper than it looked. The car fishtailed, its tires losing their grip for a terrifying moment. My heart leaped into my throat. This was not a normal road, it felt wrong, as if it had been laid down without regard for direction, a mere suggestion of a path through the wilderness. I tried to rationalize. The entity was gone, I had survived. The ritual, whatever it was, had been interrupted or perhaps even fulfilled in some way I didn't understand. I had to believe that. I had to believe I was simply driving away, escaping. But the road refused to cooperate. My breath hitched. Ahead, the headlights caught something standing by the side of the road. Not a person. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs seemed unnaturally long, like a contortionist's. It was utterly still, a black silhouette against the slightly less black night. My foot slammed on the brake. The car skidded, coming to a halt mere yards away. I stared, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't moving. It wasn't reacting to my headlights, to the sudden roar of my engine. It was just there, waiting. Was this another manifestation, another guardian of the land? Or was it something that had followed me from the manor, a consequence I hadn't anticipated? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The figure remained motionless. I couldn't see a face, but I felt its gaze, a heavy, unseen weight pressing down on me. My hands flew to the gear shift, my mind a chaotic scramble. Reverse, I had to get away. But as I fumbled, my eyes were drawn back to the figure. Was it? Shifting. A subtle movement, a slight tilt of its impossibly long head. Or was it my eyes playing tricks, the strain of the night and the fear? The squeaking of the wipers continued its maddening rhythm. I finally slammed the car into reverse, the tires spinning on the loose gravel. I didn't dare look back. I just drove, blindly, desperately. The image of the silent, waiting figure burned into my mind. The road continued its relentless, disorienting twists. Had I imagined it? Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was as palpable as the cold metal of the steering wheel beneath my clammy hands. The road finally straightened, widening slightly. In the distance, a faint glow. Civilization, a farmhouse, hope, a fragile, desperate thing, flickered within me. But as I sped towards it, my gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. It was too far away to be sure, too indistinct. But it was there, or was it? The gravel crunched beneath the tires, a sound both familiar and alien. Familiar from the endless miles of driving. Alien because I didn't recognize the texture of this particular grit, the way it shifted and spat from under the wheels. The headlights cut twin tunnels through the suffocating black, illuminating only the immediate slick surface of the road. Trees, skeletal and gaunt, clawed at the edges of the beam, their branches like grasping fingers. This was the night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal part of the journey, the part where the world outside the car ceased to exist, replaced by a churning void. I hadn't meant to leave, not really. The thought had been a tiny seed, a whisper of escape that had somehow inexplicably taken root and blossomed into this desperate flight. Or perhaps, more accurately, I had become the prisoner of my own obsession. The folklore, the entity, the ritual, they were no longer academic curiosities. They were the very air I breathed, the taste of rust and old blood on my tongue. It wasn't just the fear of it, whatever it was that had driven me from the manor. It was the fear of myself. The way my mind had begun to twist, to rationalize the impossible, to see patterns in the peeling wallpaper and the scuttling of unseen things in the walls. The historian in me, once a beacon of logic, had become a willing accomplice to madness. The rain started then, a soft patter at first, then a drumming crescendo against the windshield. It blurred the edges of the world even further, turning the night into a greasy smear. I'd scrubbed my arms raw in the shower back at the manor, trying to wash away the phantom touch, but it lingered, a persistent itch beneath the surface. Was I truly free? The question gnawed at me. I had packed only what I could carry, leaving the journals, the artifacts, the unsettling weight of Blackwood's history behind. But what if I hadn't left it behind? What if I had merely absorbed it, carried it within me like a disease? The folklore spoke of cyclical sacrifices, of entities that fed on belief, on the very essence of those who dared to acknowledge them. And I had acknowledged it. I had courted it. I had, in my own misguided way, invited it in. The trees were no longer just trees. A branch, thick and gnarled, snapped across the road ahead, startling me. The car skidded, tires screaming, coming to a halt mere inches from the obstacle. I waited, breath held tight, for the sound of footsteps, for the rustle of leaves that wasn't caused by the wind. Nothing, only the relentless drumming of the rain and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I got out, my legs trembling, and wrestled the heavy branch to the side of the road. It was damp, surprisingly heavy, and smelled of decay and something else. Something metallic like old pennies. As I pushed it aside, my fingers brushed against something embedded in the bark. A small, crudely carved symbol. I'd seen it before, in the manor, etched into the floorboards of the forbidden room. I scrambled back into the car, fumbling with the ignition. The engine sputtered, then caught. I didn't look back at the branch. I didn't dare. I just drove, the image of that symbol seared into my mind. The rain had intensified, lashing against the car, and the world outside the headlights was a churning, indecipherable chaos. I was driving, yes, but was I driving away? Or was I driving towards something that had finally found its way out?